Project Torque was a game that caught my eye when it appeared on Steam. It's a free-to-play MMO racing game developed by Invictus Games. Originally, it was online from 2006 to 2010 under the title of Level R for European countries. Then, it was picked up by another publisher, being renamed to Heat Online, and ran from 2010 to 2014. In December of 2019, it finally got its third revival on Steam, now being handled by Jagaro Ltd. I was never familiar with the previous iterations, but after playing, I was left with a sour taste in my mouth. While Project Torque is definitely not a bad game, its core MMO design will lead to an eventual third shutdown if it continues down this path and needs to be radically changed to avoid this fate. So before I rip this game apart, let's talk about the gameplay itself. See, Project Torque is definitely a much better alternative out there when looking at Invictus' previous titles. It expands on the good physics presented in Cross Racing Championship and LA Street Racing, offers more variety, has a great amount of tracks and vehicles to choose from. I did have a good time playing this game, whether it was the arcade racing, capture flag, or the other game modes. Even though the game is outdated when it comes to visuals and menu design, Project Torque is still a very fun racing game to play. However, the problems start with its core design. Tell me, what makes this game a MMO racing game compared to other games in the genre? It doesn't have those typical MMO aspects like missions, side quests, a story, or an endgame. All it is just a collection of different game modes, literally no different than much of the racing games out there. They are trying to force the racing game formula into an incompatible medium. The economy is another problem being brought up. While the economy is much better than the previous iterations, it's still driving people away. There is just too much grind for the parts, upgrades, and other vehicles. Now, I do understand that every game does have a grindy aspect to it. However, due to the sheer amount of vehicles and the prices on these items, it makes the grind way worse. Just to give you an idea, I have a crappy car in the Street 1 class. I want to save up and get another vehicle instead rather than upgrading this vehicle. If I were only to play Capture the Flag events that, let's say, pay around $1,100 per match, this means that I would have to do 19 matches just to get a vehicle for $20,000. Since each match is 10 minutes, this means I'll spend 3 hours and 12 minutes just to get one car. That isn't even counting if I want upgrades and visual parts. If I just do arcade racing, then that is like around $650 per match, meaning I would still have to do 31 matches. I've put a lot of time into racers like this, but this is way too much. Of course, these payouts will vary, but still, it highlights the main problem with the game's progression. These problems have led to a gradual downfall of the player base. Due to this low player count, there are usually a few people playing the other game modes, while the majority congregates in the arcade racing mode. Also, the lack of players on the North American servers meant that I had to jump on European servers to play in populated lobbies. This has caused a huge problem for new and veteran players. New players will come in to see that the grind is way too much, so they'll either leave or stick to the lower tier classes. For veteran players, they grinded so many hours before and possibly put in lots of money in the previous iterations. To come back with none of that after 2 failed attempts is making them question if they want to continue supporting this project. I am sure there are some new and old players who are supporting this game, but for the majority of players, it's not worth it. Why would we be willing to support a game that has shown time and time again that its core business model just doesn't work? Project Torque cannot continue down this self-destructive path again, so this is what I imagine a reinvented Project Torque would look like. Firstly, remove the server overhead by switching to Steamworks. I'm honestly surprised this didn't happen already, since they released the game on Steam anyways. I will say this is definitely not the easiest thing to do, but would give the developers more breathing room as they wouldn't have to worry about server costs. Secondly, strip away all the MMO grindy aspects of the game. I want a game where I get every car and every upgrade without spending copious amounts of time or money on microtransactions. In order to balance out the removal of microtransactions, make it a game you must pay for and new content is released as DLC. This is the same approach taken by games like City Skylines and Grip Combat Racing. While it's not a method I particularly like too much, it would be so much better than the MMO monetization scheme being used right now. Lastly, AI racers and an offline single player needs to be implemented. Especially for online modes where there's a lack of players, it would be nice to have AI fill those slots. Or if you don't want to play online, you can always fall back to single player. I could suggest more, like redesigning the UI and bringing back missing content, but I feel like this is the bare minimum in order to save this game. I know these changes can't be made overnight, but I feel like that they are needed in order to continue the game's future. Project Torque is an interesting experience buried under an outdated MMO design and service that will end up killing this game again. I suspect that we'll see this game shut down in another 4 years or sooner if the developers don't take the necessary steps to fix it. It's time that Project Torque is radically changed in order to solidify itself in today's gaming world.